Tonight we have a talk entitled Bellaire Goblet, Controversy, Conflict, and Creativity. Our speaker is Fred Ottoson. He is a native of Shadyside, Ohio, and a graduate of Shadyside High School and the Ohio State University. He taught science and computer science at Bridgeport and Bellaire High Schools. Upon leaving the classroom, he became active in the National Imperial Glass Collectors Society and currently serves on the board, as well as maintaining other memberships in many glass clubs. He organized the Shadyside Community Band, in which he plays the trombone, is a charter member of the Greystone Viaduct Society here in Bellaire, and serves on the Bellaire Historic Landmark Committee. Many of Fred's family members worked in the glass industry. Among them, his maternal grandfather, Henry Vaupel, was a mold maker at Rodefer Glass in Bellaire, and his paternal grandfather, Carl Ottoson, came to Imperial in 1931 to oversee the reorganized cutting shop. His father, Axel, was a ceramic engineer at Imperial, and from about 1942 until his retirement in 1977. Uncle Henry Vaupel was a mold maker at Imperial in the 1920s, but he spent the majority of his career with the Overmyer Mould in Winchester, Indiana. Brother Eric and great-uncle Ernest Ottoson also worked for brief periods at Imperial. Fred obviously is an expert in this field, and he has a long lineage of family members who have worked in this arena. So please welcome Fred Ottoson.
Thank you, Paul. Well, we have a few people from the Imperial Glass Society here this evening, and we also have a few bits of information in the back, so don't miss looking over some of the things you might buy and take up for the Greystone Viaduct Society and also the National Imperial Glass Collectors, if you would. But tonight's talk is not about Imperial, although you can't get away from Imperial 100%. I will be tying it to Imperial at the end of the program. Now we'll see how things go here. And if the lighting is fine, we'll proceed. There we go. It is indeed an incredible story of controversy, conflict, and creativity. It's pretty amazing the stuff that went on. Now you may think I got my lecture mixed up here, leading off of the slide of Belmont Glass Works, but this is where it all started. In fact, I could go back even further. It started in Wheeling. A lot of the people who came to Belmont and started Belmont were from Wheeling. And Belmont Glass was located at the corner of 34th and Hamilton, where the Kroger used to be, and the coal mine was up on a hill in there where the coal came right down into the factory and fed the plant. These were the officers that were elected on January 26, 1876. E.G. Morgan was the president, and so on and so forth. You see the names there. W.A. Gorby, I can tell you that Hal Gorby, Dr. Hal Gorby, who is a professor at WVU, wrote the Walking Tours of South Wheeling, is a descendant, or at least in some distant way, a descendant of W.A. Gorby. And we have the other gentleman you see there. They were obviously doing very well. They were presented awards at that same meeting. And it was in 1876. August of the same year, they accepted resignations. You might notice a lot of same names. It was written in the paper that these withdrawing people from the board and so on of the company were withdrawing and going to start a new factory. And this was going to be on Noble Street. And indeed, this was Bellaire Goblet. Now here are the resignations that were accepted. And these were the appointments for Bellaire Goblet on October 23rd. Same people. E.G. Morgan, W.A. Gorby, and Henry Vaupel. One more name we can add to this, Melvin Blackburn, M.L. Blackburn, was manager of the mold shop. I don't know that he had anything to do with Belmont. He may have, but I don't know. So here again, we have 34th and Hamilton. If you make the right turn, let me go back for just a moment. If you make the right turn, right there, you can go north on Monroe Street. And as you go north on Monroe Street, you'll see this building, which harkens back to the 19th century, I think. And then you see a housing development on 36th and Monroe, between Monroe and Noble. Now back in the day, the steel rail trestle was not there. And I'm not sure exactly how much of this was actually occupied by Bellaire Goblet, but it was between Monroe and Noble. This is very difficult to figure out, but I believe the original building that they built I'm not going backwards here. Here we go. I believe this is the original building. They added on toward the hillside, and that became the Globe Lantern Works, I believe. You can see it is labeled with the number 6. This is actually from the government photograph, or not photograph, but drawing that Attorney Frizzy had reproduced, and you can see it hanging in various places around town. It looks like they started production about the same time. There was oftentimes a holiday shutdown of the glassworks and also a summer shutdown. So it wasn't uncommon to read time and again in the papers that the plants would be fired up again, or they would start the fire. So here we are on roughly the middle of January 1877. It looks like both Belmont and Bellaire Goblet were going to start. This is interesting here. At Bellaire Goblet, the people agreed to these terms. An 800 goblet move per 5-hour turn was going to earn them $1.75. Now the move was the number of pieces set in a given turn. And back in those days, the turn was not 4 hours, it was 5 hours. And $1.75, that's not a whole lot of money, is it? At Belmont, however, they were making only 600 goblets per turn, or per move, however you want to look at it, and they were earning $2. So it looks like Bellaire Goblet had a way to make a little bit more money than Belmont. Well, fires were common in the glass house, and this was a small one, but it was just a little snapshot of what was to come. Only $100 worth of damage. And I throw a few names in here because some of you may recognize some of the names from way back when. I don't know, but a company by the name of John Criswell was at work the very next week, fixing up things after that fire. This is some of the legal language you see in the paper. W.A. Gorby had a lot of issues, and this was one. He was in court, like another guy I'm going to be telling you about here soon. Can you help me understand what this is saying? I don't understand. I don't understand.
A demurrer is, you're saying that there's no cause of action, there's no basis for relief. So you simply say, even if what they say is true, they don't have a cause of action. And the demurrer of the defendant to the reply of the plaintiff was overruled, which would mean that the plaintiff was able, or means that the defendant's demurrer was overruled. No, it means the plaintiff lost, and that's the reason the plaintiff accepts.
So W.A. Gorby lost?
So the defendant should have won.
Okay.
The demurrer was granted, and therefore the plaintiff accepts. That's the best I can help you.
Okay, there we go. In 1877, it looks like the flint glass workers were starting to get organized. And they were claiming that they had reached an arrangement where everybody was going to work on a 600 goblet per 5-hour turn or a 600 goblet move per 5-hour turn. But our goblet didn't go along. Remember, these were the terms. $1.75 for 800 goblets. A goblet, by the way.
It's a goblet, just simple stemware. Apparently everybody drank out of goblets on the table back in the 1800s. Tumblers apparently didn't come along until, I don't know. There was a Bellaire tumbler company or a Belmont tumbler, but anyway, they made lots of different goblets.
So what do you suppose happened? Strike? Well, before we get to that, I want to tell you a little bit about what things were like. You may know that Hobbs had a factory in Wheeling, and he had just come back from a tour of England. And he got back on a Friday night. On a Saturday night, the Intel reporter or editor, one of the representatives of the paper, interviewed him. And he got this from John Hobbs. Laborers in Europe were making 10 and 15 cents per day. Not $1.75 for 5 hours, 10 and 15 cents per day. So it isn't any wonder why we had immigration to the United States. And I talked to a guy not too many months ago who lives in Pittsburgh now, and he's from Scotland. And he says, Americans just don't understand, and this is today, not in the 1800s. He said, Americans just don't understand the opportunity that exists here. And he is so happy to be here. And he's in the music world. So, you know, the allure of America and the reasons for people wanting to come here remain. They reported in the paper there was some difficulty between workmen and managers. Prospects were not good. And they did walk out. I mean, there was just nothing they could do. Well, things were going on behind the scenes, but on 2 days before Christmas, they summoned everybody into the factory and they agreed to work at the new terms. And everybody was going to be forgiven. They were going to make 600 goblets for $1.75. They're not going to get $2, but they're only 600 goblets now. Well, the day after Christmas, W.A. Gorby's father, Josephus, decides that he's going to go out of business, basically go bankrupt. I don't know what was going on, but there was something mentioned about an affair. And I don't know, and I don't know in the 19th century whether the word affair actually meant what we think of it as today. But here he is. He was in business in Bellaire from 1854. And all of a sudden, his son, W.A. Gorby, is involved in this labor dispute at the factory. And he's going out of business. He had liabilities of $15,000, and his assets were $10,000. And that included his home, I believe. Well, not long after Christmas, after he got back to work, management is accused of score tampering. Now, I carried in at Imperial a couple of times, and the carrying in people who carried the glass from the mold over to where it was cooled, were the ones responsible for keeping track of how many pieces were made. And you take a piece of chalk, and you'll make tally marks. And I actually wrote those tally marks on metal, on a metal stand. And the boss would come around now and then and check things and see how things were going. Well, this is not good, obviously. If they're tampering with the score, then, you know, they're making X number of goblets, and it's being reported as something less. Then we have one Charles Rosser coming into the scene. They changed his job for the second time during the week, and he took exception to that. He was let go for using imprudent language and bad work. Well, the workers decided they wanted Charles reinstated, so he was. And this was printed in the paper, and things were back to normal. Mary has a marriage bell How about that? December 31st. Well, they're called back to the factory in the middle of January. Guess what? The strikers were out of a job. The people who had actually agreed to go back to work under these merry arrangements were just told, you don't have to work anymore because they brought in replacements. The union was very loosely organized, let's face it. The president, E.G. Morgan, ordered everybody to the factory and they were paid off. And that was it. Now this is written by somebody by the name of C. I don't know who C was, but he wrote a letter to the editor basically, and this is one of his comments about how they went to work way back a year before. He described the situation as, well, we were induced by the velvety arguments of the late employers that we worked for. Not the most complimentary comment, for sure. And you can see here that the replacements were used as a blind and decoyed into the 800 goblet trap. They actually posted the names or listed the names in the paper, and you may know some of these names as Bellaire names. You might notice Charles Rosser at the bottom. He was the one who was let go for bad language and bad work. There was quite a gathering on a Saturday night at the Cleveland and Pittsburgh Railway Depot as the replacement workers came in. They wanted to see what was going on, and I guess it was quite a scene. This is the old railroad depot. This is not the one we think of on the Greystone Viaduct. This was at the bottom of 34th Street, just 2 blocks north and towards the river. In fact, we pretty much drive through this area on Route 7 today. They said they had comfortable quarters, and they were offered the same terms as the discharged employees. They made fun of them in the paper. They called them the Boston Snow Shovelers. It was interesting, and originally they thought that these people were from Western Pennsylvania, but they were from all the way from Boston. Amazing. And W.A. Gorby was the guy who went to Boston apparently and brought these people back. They were sleeping in the packing room and eating in the factory. Here we have C again, charged the mayor and his court of showing favoritism in mayor's court to these people from Boston. Well, the mayor writes back, and he questioned C, whoever C was, his integrity. This got really ugly. Then there was violence threatened, or perhaps there was violence threatened, who knows? You read these reports, you just don't know what to think. It's kind of like news today. You know, is it fake news or is it not? It's pretty amazing. Well, they printed a card, which was a letter to the editor in the paper, doubted Morgan's claim of threatened violence on him. The workers apparently really didn't want any violence. That's my take on it. Who knows what actually went on? But this is what they said about E.G. Morgan. Check this out. This was printed in the paper. He had a reputation as a deep schemer, and wisdom and cunning had full shares of him. President of the company. Wow. Meanwhile, things were still going smoothly in Wheeling, and some of the discharged workers were finding work in Wheeling. At this point, later on in 1878, the union was getting a little more organized. It was still not the American Flint Glass Workers Union, but they claimed to have represented everybody in Bellaire, Martins Ferry, Wheeling, and Kirkwood. Kirkwood was where LaBelle Glass was, which later on became Crystal. And they arrived at a move of 600 goblets per term. And course, Bellaire Goblet refused this arrangement, as we said. Well, Bellaire Goblet was making money. They expanded, and they ended up taking over the Ohio Glass Works in South Bellaire in the First Ward, just really adjacent to what we know of as the First Ward School today. In fact, right across the street from the so-called haunted house at 1699 Guernsey. Here's the ad that was in Leeds Directory in 1877 for the Ohio Glass Company. I find it interesting here. They may have had some problems. I don't know. You've got to read between the lines and infer a few things. They have 4 blank dashes for the president. That's kind of strange. They do have a secretary listed, but no president. Well, anyway, they pretty much went out of business at this point. Bellaire Goblet took over their factory. This construction work, though, seems to be at the first site, where I told you about the Globe Works that was located up toward the hillside from where the original factory was. I believe this is what they're referring to here. A lot of slimy mud was removed. They did a lot of construction. Like I say, they did so much construction, it was really apparently going quite well for Bellaire Goblet financially. They were going to build a packing room and a warehouse, or a packing and warehouse room, whatever you want to call it. And they were going to store straw and so on. Now, everybody packed their glass in straw. And they made their own barrels for the most part, or had a barrel factory of some sort real close by. Imperial did this as well. Well, 1879, October 27th, Mr. Brown comes back in Mr. Morgan's office, and Mr. Morgan had passed away right in his office chair, the president. So he was a coal operator, and he had a lot of irons in the fire, and he was very highly talked about in the obituaries and all the stories that followed. Of course, it depends, I guess, on what side of the fence you were on as to what you thought of E.G. Morgan, but he passed away not long after Bellaire Goblet was founded. Bellaire Goblet actually made only goblets, amazingly enough. And they apparently did some cutting too. Now, I don't have any pieces of cut Bellaire Goblet ware up here, but you can see a lot of pressed ware and a lot of patterns. They decided at the Ohio Works facility that they were going to put in a new 13-pot furnace. This was going to be run by gas, by the way, as well. And at this point, Bellaire did have gas. In fact, it was bragged about in the paper that Bellaire had the best gas in the state. That did not turn out to be true too many years later. Interestingly, in 1877, not long after Bellaire Goblet opened, there was a wall that was blown in by a windstorm. Now, that was only less than a year after the factory was opened. The wall blew in. And not only did it blow in, but it killed a 17 or 18-year-old by the name of Small, who lived up on Rose Hill. Well, things went on, and Bellaire Goblet was doing well. Only problem is 9 of the 13 pots in their new furnace broke. Not a good thing. Apparently they were not arching their pots or heating them up properly before they decided to try to produce glass from them. This is a major catastrophe, but certainly it was a lot less financially of a problem for them back in the 1880s than it was later on when Imperial was having cracked pots. Well, we have another strike going on. Amazing strike after strike. Not long afterwards, running well. The union and the management were getting along better. They were one of the first subscribers to the telephone company, which is pretty interesting. They needed enough subscribers to make it worthwhile, so the telephone actually came into existence in Bellaire. Meanwhile, I told you about the building wall that collapsed in 1877. This made the papers big time, especially the Wheeling Register, strangely enough. But it was reported in all three papers, the Wheeling Intel and the Belmont Chronicle and the Wheeling Register. Now, obviously it was in the other Bellaire papers too, but they were all gone. And we don't have any of them. But thanks to Attorney Frizzy back there, we do have one day of one paper from 1873 in Bellaire, and it's upstairs on microfilm. So thank you for that. And I actually did find an ad in that paper for Belmont Glass Works. One snippet of an ad. So anyway, when the wall fell, this boy by the name of Small passed away. The plaintiff, the people representing the Small family, were asking $10,000 in damages. Now, this is over 3 years after it happened. And they started deliberating, the jury did, that is, on a Thursday morning at noon. They deliberated until Saturday night. They came back with a verdict on Monday morning. You might figure that they came back with a verdict in the plaintiff's favor. How much do you think they were awarded? Now, the family asked $10,000. Obviously, for wrongful death is how we would call it today, or something of that sort. Now, $10,000 today would probably be, well, maybe 20 times that. So, probably we're looking at something similar today would be around $200,000. And I'm sure that's meager compared to what we hear lawsuits go for today. But I would say 20 times 10,000 would be roughly 200,000 in today's terms. Anyone have any idea? What do you think?
$100.
$100? Pretty good guess. 2,000? 300. $5. $5. And that's not all. Both sides, the defendant and the plaintiff, had to absorb their own court costs. And I don't know what that came to, and I never read what it came to, but pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. $5. Well, meanwhile, again, Bellaire Goblin seemed to be doing pretty well financially. They were going to facelift W.A. Gorby's office. He was supposed to have one of the finest offices in the city when it was all done. The boys went on strike for 5 cents more. The boys, you say, well, it's not uncommon for kids as young as, well, at least 14 years old, even if not younger, to be employed in the glass house. And they could do work just as well as the men, in some cases even better, for less money. Apparently they got that settled, and Bellaire Goblin decided to consolidate everything into the First Ward site, which is where we kind of think of Bellaire Goblin as being today, at least I do. The Lantern Globe Company was going to take over the Monroe Street and 36th Street site. Well, not too long after that, they're going to build a new office building on Union Street. Now this is off a letterhead. This is what it looked like. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the odd numbers would have been on the east side of Union Street, contrary to the way we number things today, where the even numbers are on the east side of the street. This would have been roughly across from the Globe House or from the Roosevelt today. Another strike. The polishing and wrapping girls all went on strike. Just one after another. This is interesting here. The Intel went back and looked at the census from 1860 and looked at where people had gone since 1860. They listed 11 such people who had worked at Hobbs. One of them was Henry Vaupel. In 1860, he was making 43 cents a move. That's 86 cents a day. So was John Robinson. And Henry Trimble, he's making 62 cents a day at Hobbs in 1860. So you can see that the Hobbs was actually a glassworkers' university. The people, in fact, you can go to Wikipedia and you can find an incredible list of people who worked at Hobbs who went on in the glass industry elsewhere and did great things. Meanwhile, in Findlay, Ohio, a new company formed. The Findlay Natural Gas Company. Keep that in mind. The Goblet Works finally got the rail line up to the side of the building. They actually were able to pump oil into their furnace, I guess, just like Imperial did. They could switch back and forth between oil and gas for that 13-pot furnace. This is the way from the letterhead that the 17th Street site looked. And you can see the rail siding, and we have the trains here. I guess somebody who understands this maybe better than I do, can you help me here? Where exactly was Union Street or Belmont Street? Is it actually right next to the building, do you think, or is it right where the train tracks are here? Any idea, anyone? This obviously faces Belmont Street, and back here is Guernsey. Okay, I think the tracks are running right up the middle of 17th Street here.
They had sidings that came from the main line over to the factory.
Okay, well, was this track right in the middle of Belmont Street? Or was this behind Belmont Street?
No, I think it was behind Belmont Street.
Okay.
They had tracks that would come from the main line over to the factory. If you go to the 1880 Atlas, or the 1888 Atlas, you can see that.
Okay. Well, here we go again. December 6th, 1884. Posted in the factory. Notices concerning new work arrangements. This is the way it looked in the paper, and it's not a very good image. But basically what they were saying is the following. We don't care whether they accept it or not. If they do, fine. If not, we'll just close down until next fall. Ominous headline. It was very small at the top of the page. The glass workers will strike. Now this is kind of strange because you might remember a little while ago I told you that the union, the so-called union at least, at Wheelings, claimed they represented everybody in the area. It wasn't quite like this come 1884. Ohio had a separate entity from Wheeling. Oh. What they wanted to do, though, is they wanted to impose the Pittsburgh method of paying people. This is piecework. So if you did not make X number of good pieces in a given move or turn, I guess you were simply going to get docked. Interesting way of talking about a lockout. Pulling the bars. Well, the union wasn't going to accept this. They had to accept it by Friday the 12th of December. They did not. They couldn't do it. The bars were pulled. Unwilling to accept the Pittsburgh method. And I wrote 180 hands at the Goblet Works. And this is where I found out that they made over 400 different types of goblets at the Goblet Works, or Overmyer goblet. Well, guess what? Remember how they said they were going to lock everybody out until fall? They did. They did. They finally decided for the Christmas trade, if you will. On September 23rd, they were going to open up again. And by October, everybody was shipping ware. I don't know exactly how they settled it, to be honest with you. Now, the Goblet Works, it says in November 6, 1885, made their first old gold glass. I don't know what they meant by that. Now, this rail car, which we're going to talk about shortly, was certainly Vaseline glass, and it was kind of gold. But they may have been talking about their amber glass, I don't know. This is kind of goldish looking too. And then they came up with some awful looking colors. I don't know what this was supposed to be. It's really a dingy something or other. I don't know what. But this one here, they were obviously experimenting with uranium. It lights up. This is an ultraviolet light. Lots of uranium in this. But it's not the typical canary glass you think of as Vaseline glass, which this piece was made in. And if you're fortunate enough to be at the Greystone Viaduct celebration, the first year they had it, Ogilvy lent the library their gold canary Bellaire railway car, which I'm going to talk about here in a moment. And I need to move along here. Here it is 6:45 already. Okay. Wrong one. Here we go. Another strike. Amazing, amazing. This involved the snappers. These were the people who would hold the glass up for the finisher. And then in 1886, Bellaire Goblet decided to go into the line of table glass, tableware. And in 1886, they finally advertised their new tableware. And here is the ad. Okay? They advertised a lamp, a covered butter, and a celery. Okay? This is part of the table setting that you would put celery in, laid down or flat. And it is in the shape of a modern, what we think of today as a gondola car. There's an interesting connection here. Melvin Blackburn, who I'm going to talk about here in a moment, was living in Colonel Sullivan's house for many years. And of course, Colonel Sullivan was a railroad guy. And I think there had to be some connection there. Meanwhile, natural gas was coming to Bellaire in bigger quantities from Wheeling. They actually ran a line across the river, right here. Here's the south end of the island, right here. They ran this line across the river and down to Bellaire. And here is 17th Street, and that's where the Goblet Works was. Okay? So they were getting a better supply of gas, at least that was the idea. It was also in 1886 that the Intel finally proclaimed that Bellaire should indeed be called the Glass City. The patent, 16,941, was offered or issued to Melvin L. Blackburn of Bellaire Goblet, and the railway car you see on the table over here is what he patented. And interestingly, I was able to acquire the original blueprints or patent documents for that railway car. There's a long story about that, and in the magazine or journal I have over there, there's a story about it, and it details the convoluted way in which that those two drawings came into private hands. It's pretty amazing. Here's the printing about it, and it's kind of laborious to read, but there you have a couple of prominent names, A.W. Boggs and W.A. Gorby on the bottom. And of course, Melvin Blackburn's signature was on those documents. And here they are. And if you can get a chance to look at them after we're done here, please do. There's the Vaseline version of it. I don't know how many of these exist. I just don't know. Here's Melvin Blackbird's family. Now, some of you may know the name because his sons, whoops. Oh. His sons are right here. This is his son-in-law, and this is his granddaughter, or grandson, Francis Perry Hopkins. They were in the stamping business in Bellaire after Melvin Blackburn passed away in the early part of the 20th century and on into the 20s and 30s, maybe even into the 40s. But Melvin Blackburn is right here. This is probably the most unique piece of glass ever to come out of Bellaire. Probably only rivaled by Belmont Glass Company's ice cream set, at least in the 19th century. Now, Imperial made some neat stuff too. I don't want to sell Imperial short, obviously. But here's the ad for the railway car. I've never seen one of these. Some sort of a lamp, but it's actually a cigar lighter. I don't know. It's pretty unique looking. But a harbinger of things to come. 20 of Bellaire's glass workers in late 1887 had already left Bellaire to go to northwestern Ohio. Among them were Deacon Scroggins, Jake Krimmel, and Hayes O'Neill. John Robinson hated to see them go, but indeed they went. Fostoria is located up here on the boundary of 3 different counties. There was a gas boom there, and gas was plentiful and very competitively priced. It was free. This is Henry Krimmel. He started Fostoria Glass in Fostoria. His name is on the Soldiers Monument in City Park, second from the top. Right there. Along with C. Henry Over and John Robinson. And they are down here. Natural gas looked like it was going to be a really good thing, right? Until March 13th, 1888, and nobody had any gas. It was a mess. The rumor started very quickly. Was Bellaire Goblet going to go to Findlay? Yes. The deal was struck. Free gas, free land, $5,000 cash bonus. Too lucrative to turn down. Makes you wonder what kind of a deal the cracker plant is going to get. You wonder. I heard the commissioner talking about that, and Greg Warren talking about it, whether they wanted some sort of a tax abatement. Who knows what might be going on there. They started building the house, glass house, and Findlay was not very far away. There's Fostoria, there's Findlay in the northern part of Hancock County. Home today to not only University of Findlay, but also Marathon Oil and Cooper Tire. The gas boom indeed took hold in northwestern Ohio. This is a sign right outside the library, very similar to ours, next to our museum and other places in town. The gas boom era. Changed the course of history in northwestern Ohio. Remember the Findlay Natural Gas Company? There it is on the plaque. We call Bellaire the Glass City. Findlay called their city the glass capital of the world. Anyway, Bellaire Goblet loaded up everything they could find on the 25 railroad cars, and they made the move to Findlay. And the end was imminent. Even after they left, there were people still leaving to go to Findlay to work for Bellaire Goblet. Not long after they built the factory in Findlay, they had a fire. They rebuilt, and then they had another fire. In 1891, U.S. Glass formed. It gobbled up Bellaire Goblet among many other factories. And Bellaire Goblet lost its identity completely, just 3 short years after it moved. Hobbs was in this deal along with Central and Crystal in Bridgeport. Remember Charles Rosser, the one who was let go because of bad work and language? Well, the guy who ran Rosser and Casto, the company that built Imperial, well, at least started to build Imperial, the Rosser here was Charles Rosser. Was it the same person? I don't know. But it was in this building on the corner of 34th and Belmont where Imperial led the first contract for the building of the factory. And then they got another contract. And then in 1903, they kind of laid down on the job. Apparently things weren't going well for Rosser and Casto. And the board at Imperial had incredible issues with Rosser and Casto. They pretty much, Imperial had to finish the building of the plant themselves. And it took over 2 years to get it done, unfortunately, or nearly 2 years. Another lawsuit. Rosser and Casto sued Imperial before they ever made one piece of glass because Imperial had withheld money because they didn't finish their work. I did read in the paper where Rosser and Casto, or Charles Rosser, built this house. And it's on 34th Street, faces south. And he built another magnificent house on the corner, which is now a parking lot next to the Methodist Church. It's gone. I don't know when that was torn down, but it was a beautiful place. You can find it on postcards. That was a very sad ending to Bellaire Goblet. It was a very controversial, stormy 13 years or so. Just amazing, amazing stuff that you can read in the paper about how things went in the 1800s and what life was like. We have a lot of people to thank. Dan Frizzy, Dave Peterson, who put me onto the railway car to begin with. Deb Blackburn, who lives in New Jersey, helped me out with understanding Melvin Blackburn's family, and that's a story in and of itself. Melvin Blackburn was a very interesting guy. Tom and Neil Bredehoff, who have done glass research for years and years. And of course, entities like the Great Stone Viaduct and the Bellaire Library and Ohio County Library. So, thank you very much. Any questions? Yes?
Fred, is there a mark on the goblets?
No.
No mark?
None of them are marked. It's not uncommon for glass workers to leave marks off their glass. Heisey was one of the first to do it. Now, I'll have to backtrack just a moment. On this, what they call a bouquet, which is kind of like a bud vase in the shape of a boot, there is a B&H on the bottom. I don't know what that stands for. But if you see one just like this and it doesn't have the B&H on it, it's not the Bellaire Goblet version. This goblet here had marks on it, but it's an advertising goblet. It was for Moreland's National Lager, okay? And I believe this was made in Finland. Really can't say for sure what was made in Finland and what was made in Bellaire, but a lot of these, especially Queen's Necklace and Giant Bullseye, these were most definitely made in Finland because the advertising came out after they moved for these patterns. Anything else? Yes?
What was the selling price for a goblet when in Bellaire's prime, or Bellaire or Belmont, and what was the selling price for the rail car?
I don't know exactly either one. What the rail car probably was fairly expensive, and I can't begin to tell you what they sold it for. The goblets sold for pennies, literally pennies. You can look in Imperial's catalogs from the early part of the century, starting in 1904, and they were selling them by the barrel for literally pennies a piece. Yes?
Fred, I saw on one of your slides, 350 barrels were shipped out. Approximately, would you know how many pieces of glass were in the barrels? 100 each, or any idea?
Ed, you can help me better on this.
It would depend on the size of the item itself. How many in a barrel?
How many goblets do you suppose? Any idea?
No.
Probably, of course they had to pack them, and they were probably very crudely handled. So I would say that there were probably 144, maybe, that's a guess, to a barrel. 12 dozen. Yes.
The Rosser house that we all know is by Smith's gas station, was that their home, or, because I know today it's an apartment building, but was that just a large family home at the time that it was built?
I don't know for sure, but I kind of assume that that's where Charles Rosser indeed decided to take up housekeeping once he got it built. With his name on it and everything, it would kind of stand to reason. I did not check his address, so that would probably be not too hard to do. That's a good question, though. Yes?
I think that the first African school was on Rose Hill, and I believe that building, the Rosser building, became the African school after they moved it from Rose Hill. There's some old photographs of it that you can actually see like a bell tower sitting on top of the roof of the building.
Did everybody hear that? The African school moved off of Rose Hill down to that Rosser building. That's interesting. I had no idea. Yes?
Fred, what's the value currently of some of the pieces that are still in existence today?
Are these pieces up here? It really depends on who is at the auction. Really, it does. A lot of them, and I say common, you don't see them every day popping up on eBay, but now and then they'll pop up, and really glass prices are down. So, virtually everything on this table is going to go for less than $50 probably. I just picked this up. I can tell you what I paid for this. As a friend of mine in Pittsburgh would say, this is one honking piece of glass. I paid $27 for this. This was at Jeffrey's Antique Mall up in Findlay. Strangely enough, I went to Findlay one day to try to find out what the Findlay papers had to say about the move, and everything. It was the first Saturday in January. Remember how cold it was? The library was closed. Heating problems. It was not all for loss, though. I got to see the ball game that I went to Findlay to see, but I did not get to go to the library. But, alternatively, I ended up at Jeffrey's and bought this. So, I only had that for about a month then. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Not a question, but when they had a move of 800 goblets a turn, I know it was a 5-hour turn versus a 4-hour. I pressed the bottom goblets in my day. I can't imagine 800. That was a lot of work.
Well, Steve can tell us that 800 goblets in 5 hours is a lot of work. And you can understand why, and I'm sure Steve especially can understand why after about 11 months of that, they had had enough. How many would you make? Any idea?
On goblets, it was usually 240, something around there.
In a 4-hour turn?
4-hour turn.
Wow.
And that wasn't laying down on the job.
How many, on a simple press piece where you have a gatherer, a presser, and a carrier boy, basically, is all you have. This is what we're talking about then, right?
Well, on the gablets, we had a presser, gatherer, finisher, 2 warming-in boys, and a carrying-in boy. So,
Yeah, I forgot about the finisher, and Clyde would not be happy if I forgot about the finisher. But the shapes of these things had to be touched up on a finishing bench. And they would roll these things back and forth, and with a piece of wood or carbon, shape the top of the goblet. So yeah, you'd have to have finishers, and glass cools quickly. So you need to warm it back into the glory hole and get it warm enough so you can make the shape the way you wanted it. So yeah, it would take more than just 3 people in a shop. Probably at least 6, yes.
Is there a book that's dedicated to the subject of this particular glass company?
I don't know if there's a book or not. I don't have any idea where it would be if there is one. All we have is catalog, not catalog, but advertisements from the journals.
That's the only way you knew about these patterns and everything? No one has written a book on this?
No one has written a book. Well, I shouldn't say that.
Yeah, we have our encyclopedias and stuff.
This is the best book there is on Finley glass, and there are 7, 8, 10 pages on Bellaire goblet in this book. But this is far from complete. We don't have a catalog of any sort that I know of. No one does that I know of. If there's one out there somewhere, let me know. Okay? I'm sure the West Virginia Museum of American Glass would love to have a copy of it. Actually, so would our museum here in Bellaire too. But there is a fair amount of information in this, but this is all Finley. And this piece here, by the way, I got it out today and realized that this is not Bellaire goblet. This is a toothpick. And it was made by Columbia Glass in Finley. There were a whole bunch of glass companies in Finley for a very short period of time. That's a neat novelty piece of a dog holding up a toothpick. This, by the way, is quite a piece too. A friend of mine found this at an auction near Lancaster here within the last year. Beautiful, beautiful decorated. And it was a souvenir of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Any other questions? Okay, thanks again, and feel free to come up here and look at the glass. Thank you very much.